Hello, current and future game developers. Chris Delion here of Gam Keto, and what we're going to talk about today is a really important message. It's the number one problem, the number one excuse I see coming from people who are either new game developers or even intermediate struggling game developers have the same problems that they say up front are why they're not doing it. So I've got about 20 work emails to send today and 4 or 5 hours of training calls and a podcast interview to record, etc. So we're going to keep this short. But the problem is the problem that they think it is, that they say it is, and tell me if this sounds familiar, is that they lack the time, the motivation, or the willpower to do it. Right? Does that ring a bell? The time, the motivation, or the willpower to do it. Now, the real thing usually lacking, underlying what makes them think that that's the problem, is that they have not picked an approach that they're sticking with. They haven't picked a sequence that they know how to follow, that they're confident is going to get them results. Right, and this applies to so many things in life. I mean, obviously, I always speak directly to my game developer folk out there, like yourself, probably. But it's something that really affects a lot of things, right? So if we look at, say, weight loss, if someone did a few days of yoga, a few days of spinning, a few days of dodgeball, a few days of swimming, they don't pick an approach for what they want to do, they're going to see the same kind of results as if they pick one and stick with it. Of like, they're going to get good at yoga, they're going to get good at whatever it is, and they're going to stick to it, and that's their plan. That can sound so simple, but it's a real problem for game developers, in part because the internet is rich with just infinite resources of learning potential, but they're scattered. And fundamentally, they're better as a reference material than they are as a training material. Here's what I mean by that, right? So at this point, everyone in the world has access to Wikipedia. So why does someone pay to go to university for learning biology instead of just reading pages from Wikipedia at random about biology? Because without the sequence there, they have no foundation to build upon. Without the foundation, then they have no more advanced understanding because there's no prereqs for these random pages of Wikipedia. All right, there's an order to learning these things. Or probably a better example, martial arts, okay, where we've got, so my brother, he flies around the world interviewing world-class mixed martial artists who are in the UFC, etc. And when he does so, each one of these people, they're kind of strongly connected to like maybe one major martial art, and in some cases, maybe two, mixed martial arts kind of in the title. But it's not like they've just dabbled in all of them and that's their skill, that they've like tried all of them. They didn't go to 2 days of Krav Maga, 2 days of judo, 2 days of taekwondo, 2 days of karate, 2 days of wrestling, 2 days of kickboxing, 2 days of, you get the picture, right? They don't have a white belt in all of them, right? They've got the equivalent of a black belt in a few, maybe one. But they're exceptional world-class experts in one or two approaches, and that is what they bring out to the battlefield as their strengths and their advantages. Now, also, in terms of game development techniques, to frame this in a form I think a lot of people have probably already heard before, can maybe connect to from their own experiences, is that if we look at something like, say, game jam culture, game jam techniques, game jam patterns, certain sets of beliefs, attitudes, programming approaches, trade-offs, etc., that are appropriate for game jam culture, that people have learned and adapted through that practice environment of making games in 48 hours alone or on a small team, usually on an experimental kind of prototype basis. There's certain pros and cons to that, right? In the same way that when we look at these different martial arts, part of what makes mixed martial arts incredibly fascinating to watch is that, one technique, like the striker, if they maintain distance, they have an advantage. The grappler, if they get up close, they have an advantage. Some of these techniques are more effective on the ground. Some of these techniques are more effective up on their feet. Some are more effective against heavier guys. Some are more effective against lighter guys, or gals, as the case might be. And now these are things that, the same thing kind of applies to game development, where those same techniques that are applicable for game jams aren't necessarily the same techniques that you would use to be engineer number 1 out of 200 on a 6-year project, stamping out the next version of a AAA franchise project with a $250 million budget. There are different processes, different trade-offs, different priorities to build that kind of product and that kind of environment with that kind of team than what you do in a game jam. Night and day. A lot of differences. And part of what's actually interested me about this is that it works both ways. So in my time in AAA, when I'd meet these people who they would be 10, 20-year industry veterans, literally world-class experts in level design or in software engineering within AI or networking or engine architecture or whatever, these same people hadn't done game jams, couldn't do game jams. It's not even clear could build a game on their own based on the present skill set. Does that make sense? It's because, and again, it's not that there's anything wrong with them. They're extremely successful, extremely accomplished game developers, but they're practicing a very different technique, right? One's judo, one's kickboxing. Okay, their technique is suited to the environments where they're working 40-hour, 50, 60, 80-hour work weeks, right? They're in an environment where the people they're working with are being paid, and that affords certain levels of authority over, this is your task, do it by then, or you're getting fired. And it's a whole different kind of structure and attitude about development, and therefore product that results from it, as well as pressures around, we have to recoup hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars of money, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars of money, with the success of this product. That's a different level of financial pressure than when you're doing a game jam, when you're smashing out a prototype. See what I mean? Of like, there's different pros and cons to these different techniques. So GAM Keto, the techniques that I teach, my approach within gamketo.com, and that includes across all my materials, right? That includes my free course at codeyourfirstgame.com. It's kind of the intro level stuff. It's my white belt. How to program games is the sequel course to that. My GAM Keto Club, my one-on-one training. Within the club, we have this thing called GAM Keto Academy. What all of it's about is how to build games at a really, really low budget. Okay, like say spending next to no money on assets, spending next to no money on paying for outside commission stuff. And instead, it's about how do you build the games you want to build by having the creative freedom afforded to you by both spending longer on a game than a game jam, but not ditching your life savings to spend a bunch of money on a product that's not yet proven with any kind of traction. Okay, it's built for exploring these like 5-6 month kind of scale projects. And the same sort of pattern is actually the same thing I've been now deploying since first club was 2004 at Carnegie Mellon, second club was 2010 at Georgia Tech. Both those organizations still cranking out games. For more than 200 games have come to these organizations. This new club, GAM Keto Club, is the exact same pattern, but open to people worldwide. And it's something that we continue to crank out games, and it's helped connect people to jobs at 3 dozen different companies, where in these interviews they're able to speak to these projects that they've finished, where they worked with people who aren't like them, where they've had to make trade-offs and decisions around the skill sets and strengths and weaknesses of their teammates, and that those kind of things come across more effectively in an interview than if they've only made games alone. It helps separate them as candidates, right? Or we've had people who from those clubs have gone out of there and started an independent game studio with Kickstarter money, where they had the traction to show, hey, here's a game we made together. We're a team who knows how to work together, and here's what we're doing next. And that gave them this added proof, this added clarity that they lack if they didn't have that background of saying, we've made games together, here's examples of our work together, we found each other, we found we can work well together. That's a different level of connection than finding some buddies and just hoping that it works. And this is all a framework built around kind of safely and responsibly exploring your gameplay ideas in a way that, again, is not going to sink your ship if it doesn't take off. Which is different than, there's other techniques out there, not my approaches, that will say, you go out there, you hire a bunch of people, you shove a bunch of money at it, you start paying for ads, you do some AdWord vetting of finding the product and market fit and all this other kind of stuff. There's an approach to that stuff. It's a different technique than the pros and cons that you make when you learn things in a GAM Keto approach, which are, again, different from like a game jam approach, but also different than being software engineer 1 out of 200 on a high salaried team of industry veterans. Different sets of skills and strengths and weaknesses. Does that make sense? But where all this goes back to, right, to go back to tied into our opening point, is that if you have an approach and that is your approach you stick to, then you're not having this problem of like you've downloaded like, the Unreal Engine and you took 2 Unity tutorials and you tried some Phaser stuff and you did some Pygame and dabbled in lots of things because you don't know what to do next, and you've never dealt with the uncomfortable parts of having to cut things out of a long-term project, which is part of how long-term projects get made. You got to stick to an approach, find an approach that's going to work for you to get you from where you want to get to what you want to be doing. And in my lifetime, I think for a lot of people, what I found was that it's people who they want to make the game they want to make. They have an idea they want to get out of them, which is different than they want to satisfy a market need for something, which is different than, if there's a trade-off, as there sometimes is, between the game you want to make and the game that's going to make you the most money or have the best shot at being a commercial potential. Let's say this one might involve free-to-play microtransactions right now, and this one may not. A lot of people actually err in favor of they want to make the game they want to make. The point isn't for them to try to get rich. They don't expect to become millionaires. They just want to make the game they want to make. Now, the mistake is thinking that to do that, you got to run a business around it. To think that the only way to do this, if you wanted to bake a certain kind of cake, right, you don't have to become a baker. You don't have to start a bakery to bake that. You just go bake that kind of cake. And so if you find low cost, low risk methods that don't take over your life, that allow you to keep a day job, that still work if you have a family to look after, etc., then in that case, you're allowed to, you have the freedom to just make your cake, to just make your game. And maybe it has some hook and connection and builds up to the next thing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The point being that when you have a sequence you stick to, right, that helps overcome the perceived problems of lack of time, willpower, or motivation. And the reason it does that is because you start seeing the positive yield from when you put in the time. You start seeing the results. You're seeing you're finishing games. You're gaining new skills. You have new understanding. You have new examples of your own experience to draw upon from a variety of different projects. You have a foundation you're building upon. This is part of why my game keto approach doesn't start in Unity, right? I used to let people start in Unity. I no longer let people start in Unity. And the reason is that if you jump straight into an engine and you think gravity's a checkbox, and you think collision just happens, sorry about that, you think collision just happens, then you're missing fundamentals about how games work and about how you can override those things to make your game feel and look different. When you see that positive yield of you follow the next step, you step, and you see that that helps you put in the more time in the future. That helps you see the happiness. So this is the same thing that helps people who are exercising a good routine wake up earlier or stay up later or squeeze in the middle of the day if they have to or wherever they can. Take a little less time watching, binge watching Netflix shows again. Take a little less time playing a game they've already played enough of, finished, and grokked, or whatever the case might be. All of which are fine and healthy things, but that's usually where the time is hidden for people who think they don't have time. Because the reality is with even 1, 2, few hours a week, consistently, week after week after week, with the right approach, you can build games. You can learn how to build games better and bigger over time, grow your skills as a game developer if you pick an approach. And that's going to help you overcome your perceived issues with time, willpower, and motivation, because you're going to have the confidence that when you get time to put into it, it's time well spent. It's moving you forward on a track towards a target you understand is exactly what you're moving towards. Does that all make sense? So whether or not, even if you don't choose to use GAM Keto as your approach, my point here is get an approach and stick with it. Get an approach, become an expert in that approach, and then complement another. Don't just go out there and just dabble and just flip through random pages of Wikipedia expecting a biology degree to fall out of it. It's not how this works. You need a sequence. That's what I provide in my one-on-one training, which that form is going to be closed soon. I think it's the first time it's been open in about a year. So if you want to apply for one-on-one training, go to gamketo.com, click on the training button. Hopefully the link's still open. If you want to join the club, it's gamketo.club is this new URL we're trying out. That's worldwide members collaborating, immersing themselves in this philosophy of game development, of keeping costs down, being able to build whatever you want to build, exploring those concepts, learning in a sequence, all that, more to say on that. But anyway, I got to get back to work today, so that's as much as I can fit in for now. Chris DeLeon here of GAM Keto. Thanks so much for tuning in. Pick an approach and stick to it. It's going to help you overcome those perceived issues, those perceived blockers of time, motivation, and willpower. And when you start seeing the gains come from the time you're able to put into it, because you have confidence of a strategy, of a sequence, that you don't just need to keep fiddling on this thing from fear of not being sure what comes next, you're going to start seeing a lot more rapid gains in the same amount of time, which can save you months of your life, years of your life. So I'm getting too excited about this. All right, so anyway, I look forward to playing your games in the future. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.